The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Dr. Lubisi, national orders, by all accounts, they went pretty well over the weekend.
Exceptionally well, Xolani. We thank all the people of South Africa and abroad who did nominate the people who eventually were honored over the weekend.
That's interesting because you're talking about nominating. Is that the process? Are people nominated?
That is correct.
Who nominates?
Anyone, even you, Xolani, can nominate. Anyone in the public can nominate any person or any organization for national orders. As we speak now, we have already opened the process of nominations, and the nominations will close on the 31st of July. So we call on all South Africans to make their nominations so that their nominations can be considered.
And then what happens after the nominations?
Once the nominations have been received, the National Advisory Council for National Orders sits down and sifts through the nominations, looks at the merits and demerits of each candidate. They do their own further research, and on the basis of that, they then make recommendations to the President, who is the grand patron of national orders. And then the President, on the basis of the recommendations of the Advisory Council, then decides who should be honored.
And presumably there's consultation. You consult widely about these issues, specifically people who may be affected directly by the award.
The National Advisory Council does do its own homework, and in some cases, yes, they do consult certain people, but it's often not done that you call meetings in stadiums, etc., to consult on national orders. The Advisory Council has got eminent people who are very respected in society and who apply their minds to the nomination.
And I say this, and you probably would have seen this in the run-up to the weekend National Orders Award, the controversy surrounding the awarding of the former president of Guyana, Lyndon Forbes Burnham, from those who are saying that he didn't deserve. Did you see that at all?
Yes, we did. We did indeed.
Did you take it into account? Were you worried about it?
Yes, of course, that worried us quite greatly. In fact, let's correct, I heard you earlier on, Xolani, I think at about 7, saying that Lyndon Forbes Burnham was honored over the weekend. Let us correct that. When the controversy arose and we listened to the voices that were putting their points across, a decision was taken to provisionally defer this honor until we have done further discussions and consultations with appropriate parties. So Lyndon Forbes Burnham was not honored over the weekend.
Oh, that's a very interesting decision. When was the decision taken?
That decision was taken last Wednesday.
Last Wednesday. So
yes.
He wasn't honored, and that's because of the pressure that came through from those who were campaigning against his honoring.
Not so much pressure, but I think we are hearing what they are saying, and we would want to consult further with them. And obviously the family, because they are supporters and there are those who are opposed, and we would want to engage all of them before we take a decision on this matter.
Professor Mohammed, you should be happy then with this decision.
Well, it's not a question of being happy or not happy. I want to say first of all, I am glad that I'm on with Dr. Lubisi. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, correctly, very much so.
Welcome, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
This here is, we are concerned about the memory of Oliver Tambo, because Oliver Tambo was a revolutionary and Burnham was not. And by that we are saying that, look, Burnham, it's not that he did not contribute to the anti-apartheid cause, but among his crimes that he committed was the killing of Walter Rodney and other opposition figures in Guyana. The South Africans fought a long, hard struggle. I mean, I grew up in Guyana as a youth, and I was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, but I was not a supporter of Burnham. Burnham came to power with the aid of imperialism, and he held on to power illegally, as Prime Minister for 16 years and as Executive President for 5 years to rigged elections in Guyana. So, I mean, he has a very controversial history. So it's not a question of us being happy. I mean, this should never have happened.
Just tell us a little bit about Dr. Walter Rodney. Some South Africans may not know. He was killed in 1980, allegedly, because there never really was an investigation, Professor Mohammed, but allegedly by Burnham.
Well, I mean, he was killed under Burnham's watch. Burnham was the executive president. We have to back up a little because, as Professor Rupert Lewis of the University of West Indies said in a statement this week, anyone who witnessed Burnham's death and witnessed Forbes Burnham on television gloating about the killing of Walter Rodney by a bomb nearly 30 years ago would be shocked to learn that he was named for this award. Burnham went on television and said his steel was sharper when Walter Rodney was killed. As the president of the country, he did, rather than gloating, he should have opened up a national and international inquiry. Walter Rodney was not just any Tom, Dick, and Harry out there. Walter Rodney, you have to remember, and we have to back up, on Walter Rodney's return to Guyana in 1972, Burnham refused to allow him to get a teaching job at the University of Guyana. Mm-hmm. In 1978, he was jailed with others on trumped-up charges. And then in 1980, he was killed. So it's not, the accusation of Burnham's involvement is not an idle accusation. And Burnham did nothing to clear his name. And his name is still not cleared because there's never been an official international inquiry into the death of Walter Rodney.
And Dr. Rodney is well known to Africans in particular for his work, authoring a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. He's got a lot of other things that he did. He stayed in Tanzania for about 6 years, right, Dr. Mohammed?
Yes, he stayed in Tanzania for about 6 years. He was also at the University of West Indies in Jamaica. Walter Rodney is well known. His works are well known. And as you rightfully said, his most prominent work is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which is still being used. In fact, it's been reprinted so many times. It is still being used across the world because it is still pertinent.
And Dr. Lubisa, I suppose the question is, how could this information have escaped those then that are entrusted with the responsibility of double-checking the nominations?
Olani, I've indicated before that former President Lyndon Forbes Burnham have got supporters and opponents. The advisory committee council took into consideration various facts around this matter. I must admit I was not at the meeting because I'm not a member of the advisory committee, but in our briefing, the advisory committee convinced us that serious consideration was given to the matter, and because there are people who are equally punting for him, for former President Burnham, and there are people who are really opposed to him, particularly around the question of Dr. Walter Rodney. So I wouldn't say that the advisory council did not take this into consideration. They really did apply their minds. However, in his wisdom, the president took a decision that we should defer this award until we have done our own homework in regard to consulting the various people on board. And I would love to, in fact, get hold of Professor Mohammed, if he can give us details.
Sure, I'll certainly do that.
So that we can be able to talk to him as well.
I'll certainly do that. But Professor Mohammed, I think there's a point there about as is the case with all sorts of legacies, there would be people supporting the former executive president Burnham and those opposed to him. And the South Africans had to consider that.
Yes, I mean, we don't want to take the place of the South Africans who have to consider that kind of stuff. I mean, Burnham has, he has a very controversial history. He did contribute. We're not saying that he did not contribute to the anti-apartheid cause. But he was very controversial. We have to be very careful. This is a person who came to power with the aid of imperialism. He did not he was on the side of imperialism at the same time that he was supporting the anti-apartheid struggles. He was not the only person. He was not the loudest voice in Guyana supporting anti-apartheid. But he was the man in charge of the state, and he was able to put that voice on the international scene. But in granting this award, Professor Luisi, you have to consider that he did not hold power legally. He held power illegally through rigged elections in Guyana between 1968 and 1985. This is a person, while he was the head of the country, he clamped down on press freedom, took complete control of the media, banned marches and street demonstrations, repressed political activists, jailed workers, made marches illegal, repressed mine workers in Guyana, sugar workers, and other workers.
Okay.
So you see, the guy have a very controversial history.
Professor Bond, good morning to you. You've been monitoring the situation surrounding the former executive president of Guyana. Your thoughts, please.
You're absolutely right. It is a time to be happy if you are South African, and worried that the impression left by this whole incident is that it's up for sale, the awards. And we got the impression in 1997 when Suharto, the dictator of Indonesia, after giving $25 million to the African National Congress, was given the Order of Good Hope Award, the most important award of the South African government, just 3 months before he was overthrown by a popular democratic revolution. And those are the kinds of incidents, like the Dalai Lama's inability to get a visa to come to Archbishop Tutu's 80th birthday, that have given the impression that if you buy some support in Pretoria, you can get away with murder.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.